Hello. Watching the crisis in the Middle East and how the U.S. government responds to it brought to mind an insight that I took away from my time in the CIA. Now, to be clear, the story is not about the CIA, but rather I'm going to talk about how the U.S. government responds to crises. And my time in the CIA is really only relevant in that I was able to watch people well above my pay grade, i.e. the White House, make decisions on how it dealt with crises. This, of course, was during the Obama administration. However, everything that I've seen since makes me think that it's equally true of the Biden administration and will probably be true of a Kamala Harris administration. Now, I'm going to vote for her anyways, but that's for a completely separate conversation. And yes, if you read my Substack, this story will be familiar to you, but I wanted to get it out to more people because I think it's actually helpful. My name is Michael Churkin, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Pax Americana, a conversation about world affairs, global conflict, military strategy, and anything else that happens to be on my mind. Okay, so here's the story. Once upon a time, I was sent for some weapons training before being sent to someplace dangerous. No, we're not talking about Jack Bauer stuff. The CIA has other people for that kind of thing. I was just an analyst. I spent most of my time just at a desk where the only thing that I was in danger of is maybe a paper cut. What they wanted, though, to give me was just enough skill and knowledge such that if I found myself in a dangerous situation, my probability of surviving would be greater than zero. Probably not much greater than zero, but at least greater than zero. The training was all about surviving. It was not about fighting or anything like that. We spent a lot of time in this course talking about what to do in case that the vehicle I was in was ambushed. Our absolute priority, they taught us, was to get off the X. That was the expression, is get off the X, meaning to get away from the danger zone, if at all possible, ideally by pushing the gas pedal to the floor of the car and driving in any direction I could. If we couldn't speed away, well, good luck. Let's skip to the 2009 presidential election in Afghanistan. As a political analyst, I was really worried about whether the election would have a result that was credible in Afghans' eyes, and whether the entire exercise would enhance or diminish the Afghan state's legitimacy. I had every reason to believe that the election would be a train wreck, not just for the Afghan people, but also for the United States, because we were conducting a war in Afghanistan, and the success of a war ultimately depended on the legitimacy of the Afghan state. At least that's what all of our coined counterinsurgency manuals tell us, that that's, the people are the center of gravity, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, I saw the window the election as a window of opportunity, the 2009 election, for the Afghan government and for us Americans to advance the cause that we were all fighting for. And but it was also an opportunity to score a potentially crippling own goal. Now, what I observed was that the U.S. government had no interest in ensuring a good outcome for the election, one that would have aligned with U.S. interests. Remember now, we were fighting a war, okay? So what would be a good outcome for the presidential election? Well, there really were two possibilities. One was, or two options, I should say. One was to do everything in America's power to ensure that the elections were credible as possible, and that the process would enhance the government's legitimacy in the eyes of the Afghan public. How might we have done that? Well, after the previous elections in Afghanistan, there was a mountain of high-quality studies by NGOs and the like that did careful postmortems of the elections and laid out all the flaws in the Afghan electoral system that had undermined those elections' credibility. Now, I know this because I read them all. That was my job, right? These studies provided an admittedly long but very detailed to-do list of things that could be done, things that were well within the ability of the United States and the international community to do that might have enhanced the electoral process and enhanced the legitimacy of elections. Now, given how important elections were for potentially enhancing the government's legitimacy, and again, this is what our coin manuals were saying was necessary for winning the war, it seems self-evident to me that doing those things, that laundry list, that to-do list, was a really good idea. I mean, after all, why not? There was no risk, and it would cost far less money than the amount of ordnance that we were firing every day in that country. And it would probably do a lot more good in terms of advancing our cause in the war, advancing the war effort. Now, the other option, remember I said that there are two options, would be to ensure that whoever won the election was somebody who would serve American interests, ideally by helping to win the war and doing those things that were probably necessary to win the war. even if that meant rigging the election in favor of a candidate of our choice, a candidate who would serve our interests better than Karzai, which frankly was a very low bar. I had ideas at the time about who that might be, and it was definitely not Hamid Karzai. My own personal favorite was Ali Ahmad Jalali. He was a former Afghan minister with excellent credentials who flirted with running against Karzai. He declined, however, because per the Afghan constitution, which remember the U.S. imposed on Afghanistan, he could not be a citizen of another country, so he would have had to renounce his American citizenship. Now, somehow the geniuses in the State Department and the NSC could not figure out how to make a deal with Jalali to ensure that after an election run he could come back or reclaim his citizenship or whatever. I mean, don't tell me that they can't bend the rules, because they absolutely can, and they do. In fact, the CIA actually has the legal power to bring into the country anybody it wants, really, without too many questions. Remember, we're fighting a war, right? So if we're willing to drop tons of bombs on Afghans and was bending the rules or finding creative ways around the rules, was that really a step too far? But I digress. Now, so what exactly did the Obama administration do? We had two options. We could strive to enhance the credibility of the election process, or pick somebody, anybody, and enthrone that person. This is what we did for Karzai, after all. We had picked him and enthroned him back in, when it all started. However, the Obama administration did neither of these things. Why? Because the priority was to get off the X. It saw the election not as an opportunity to serve U.S. interests, but rather a potential catastrophe. And the only clear objective for the administration was to get over with it as quickly as possible, to get off the X, and therefore prevent what it was concerned would be the worst possible outcome. This is what it was convinced of, which was what they call in the trade a low probability, high risk scenario. Specifically, they were afraid that the election could result in the collapse of the broad pro-government coalition and possibly even a civil war. Was this possible? Yeah, I mean, I guess, but it was really unlikely. Now, in contrast, what was absolutely certain was that Karzai was going to cheat, the election would be a mess, and if we did nothing, either to enhance the election's credibility or to ensure the success of some candidate of our choice, we were going to do ourselves real harm. As it turned out, the election, predictably enough, and I certainly predicted it, was deeply, deeply flawed. Yes, Karzai cheated, although bizarrely enough, the White House was genuinely surprised by this. Like, he cheated? How could that be? Now, it almost acted as if Karzai had ambushed them. But what troubled the U.S. government was that Karzai failed to win an outright majority despite his shenanigans, which, per the Afghan constitution, which remember we imposed on them, that meant that the election would have to go to a second round. For the White House, this was a nightmare because it meant that we were going to linger on the X rather than get out of there as quickly as possible. So what did the administration do? It did everything it could to rush the process to a speedy resolution and, in effect, to push the gas pedal to the floor and get off the X as quickly as possible. The White House achieved this by pressuring the second-place candidate, Abdullah, to concede, even though he had every right not to concede, and even though all of his allegations about Karzai's cheating were true, or most probably true. And the U.S. got everybody involved to agree to forego a second round of the second round of the election, never mind the fact that that was what the Constitution that we had imposed on them actually required, and never mind the damage that might be done to the legitimacy of the election result. Also, never mind the fact that we were ultimately committing ourselves to a second Karzai administration rather than seizing the opportunity to push him inside in favor of Abdullah. Now, was Abdullah such a great candidate? No, not really. The third-place finisher, whom I liked very much, by the way, a guy named Ramazan Bashardost, he correctly described Karzai and Abdullah as the king and queen of corruption. But Karzai, we already knew, was a failed proposition. He was going to be a failure, right, for the war. Whereas Abdullah, you don't know, meant there's a chance, and I think it's better to bet on a slim chance than none at all. So anyway, all we accomplished ultimately was getting off the X while also ensuring that the election was a farce. Yay us. Now, this brings me to Israel and the Middle East. The war that began on October 7, and unfortunately, I'm actually filming this on October 1st, the day of the big Iranian ballistic missile attack. So it's possible that by the time this video airs, this will all be irrelevant or OBE, but I kind of doubt it. So The war that began on October 7, like the Afghan election, is in fact an opportunity for the U.S. to weigh in and to advance its own interests. Now, that could mean several things. There are some options here. One option is to stomp on Israel and force it to accept some kind of political settlement that we think might suit U.S. interests. Or, and this is what I think the U.S. should do, the U.S. could help Israel, stomp on Israel and its proxies, which is something that we've really long wanted to do, but never really did out of fear. Carter chickened out, Reagan chickened out, all of the presidents ever since have chickened out. Iran is not our friend. Iran has been our enemy for decades. Hezbollah, an Iranian proxy, has killed more Americans, by the way, than any terrorist group other than Al-Qaeda. And the only reason why Al-Qaeda comes in first place is because of 9/11, which was a bigger mass casualty event than when Hezbollah blew up our embassies and our Marine barracks. So here's our chance to actually do something. We can reshape the Middle East, but that idea is fraught, right? Nobody wants that, and everybody's scared. Or, alternatively, we could just work to preserve the prevailing status quo, which is what we've been doing for the last, I don't know how many years, since 1978, which clearly ultimately serves no one's interests except maybe Iran's, and certainly not ours. The Biden administration almost certainly will not seize the opportunity. Again, maybe by the time I air this video, I will be proved wrong, but I doubt it. From its point of view, the priority is getting off the X. So it's going to search for ways to limit what's happening and to de-escalate. It's going to contain, control, limit, right? Which means ultimately kicking the can down the road again, and ultimately enabling Iran and its proxies to live another day, to catch their breath, to collect themselves, and ultimately to kill more Americans and to attack American interests. Now, what exactly are the American strategic objectives here? I mean, is our goal to weaken Hezbollah and Iran, right, which sort of in theory we've been trying to do for decades, or is our goal to simply avoid a confrontation with them? Do we wish to give them a break so that they can, get back on their feet? Is getting off the X so desirous a goal that we're willing to pay any price? Getting off the X amounts to dodging a bullet, for sure, but it doesn't stop our enemies from trying to hurt American interests, and most likely from attaining a position of greater strength than certainly that they have at this very moment. I'm going to close this video with an amusing anecdote from my CIA training. We practiced responding to ambushes by dividing in pairs, and then we took turns pretending to drive mock pickup trucks. We pretend to drive, right? And then when the instructor would yell, ambush, we'd go through the steps that they prescribed for us. So the first thing was to simulate hitting the gas pedal with our foot, right? And then at some point, when the instructor would say, it failed, you're stuck, we would have to practice getting out of the car, which is actually harder than you think, right? If you're not used to carrying arms and having to deal with a seatbelt, and if you're not used to the fact that often, people like U.S. government civilians in dangerous places travel around in armored trucks, right? And the doors are so heavy that if you're not careful, you could do yourself some real harm. So this actually requires a little bit of practice, because you don't want to have to do this the first time ever in a crisis situation. You could really crush your legs or whatever. Anyways, we were driving. I was in the left, the guy in the right. So I was driving. The guy in the passenger seat was just some random contractor. And the instructor yelled, ambush. So what do? I stomp on the gas pedal, right? And then the guy sitting next to me, bizarrely enough, he started trying to put his legs into my space, right over the drivetrain, that well between the two seats, and to put his feet onto my right foot, which was now on the gas pedal, and to stand on me, right? To stand on my foot, all while he's in the car. I'll never forget the look on the instructor's face. This was this salty old Marine Special Operations guy, MARSOC guy, who was watching what was happening in stunned silence before he finally asked calmly, "What the F are you doing?" To which the guy, whose both feet now were crushing my right foot, he said, "But you told us to slam on the gas pedal with our feet if we're ambushed." That guy did not return to training the next day. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and please check out also in the description I put links to my LinkedIn feed, my Twitter, my Substack, Pax Americana, as well as to my website, michaelshirkin.com. And please check out the video. There should be a link popping up right about now to more videos. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Bye-bye.